There's a lot of negativity on the internet, and it could have been attributed to many things in life. In my timeline, for example, a lot of these can be attributed to people being mad that the recent modern incarnation of a popular cartoon in the 80s sucked harder than Kevin Smith's attempts on crying in social media, or at least that's what people in my timeline say. I wouldn't know because I didn't watch it, so allow me to disappoint the people in my Twitter DMs, my emails, and my stream chats, go subscribe, stream channel link down below, that I haven't taken a glance at the latest thing that I'm sure people are justifiably mad about for many reasons. I spent way too much time playing Alpha Protocol, and I have a much more enriching day. Alpha Protocol is a really unique and interesting game because it's basically the best James Bond RPG game that anyone has ever made. It's the only game where you can truly roleplay as a secret agent, complete with the guns, the deception, the booze, the luxury lifestyle, and of course, the ladies. Unfortunately, this game has many issues that are so serious, some even name it as their worst or most disappointing game of 2010, and I totally get it. But that said, I still feel like Alpha Protocol is a game that is worth playing. Or at least if you can find a game, because the game got delisted off of Steam. That's right, the game is off of Steam around 2019 because apparently Sega has issues with the music licensing and they just couldn't be bothered extending it. You can only get this game through secondhand copies from a key reseller or by doing some favors from Monkey D. Luffy and the Straw Hat Gang. But if you do get this game, is it worth playing in current year? Yes, and here's why. In Alpha Protocol, you play as Mike Fortin, generic white male video game protagonist number 634 that you can give a slightly darker tan, and that's pretty much it. Anyway, you get to choose Mike Fortin's personal backstory in the game and specialization later on. I chose the recruit backstory in my playthrough, and by recruit I mean the Hollywood kind of recruit, which is recruit on paper but a super ultra badass in practice. Thank you, WeMod. Mike is part of a secret Black Ops group of some sort called Alpha Protocol, who is tasked to do all sorts of Black Ops super secret government agent things, infiltration, sabotage, espionage, and banging really hot chicks apparently. At one point, an airline goes down for mysterious reasons, and Mike finds out that it's apparently caused by the private military corporation, or PMC, that he's been working with. So he goes rogue and tries to make sure that those damn war profiteering mongrels do not destabilize the world's political relationships and turn a Cold War into a hot one. As for the gameplay premise, as I said in the beginning, it's basically a James Bond RPG. You are usually stationed in a hub of some sort that allows you to check your emails, go to the black market to buy weapons, and select whatever missions you're going to embark on. The missions themselves are very linear, you go from one point to another, and there are a couple of collectibles and intels as you go forward. In terms of narrative role-playing, the dialogue system allows you to pick 3 different personality options: professional, aggressive, and suave. Depending on the characters, these personalities will either make the characters really like you or really hate you, and depending on their opinions towards you, their decision that they can make can have a minor impact for the missions or even a major one for the missions. The game's combat is done in real time. You can shoot enemies with your assorted weapons so you can modify and upgrade in the store, or just punch and kick them. There are stealth elements that allow you to take down enemies without being seen. The game also has lockpicking and hacking minigames, all of which are pretty nice. The game also has abilities that you can use that will give you certain perks and benefits like running silently or taking down lots of enemies or even become invincible. Overall, it's a full-fledged James Bond espionage action RPG. Before we talk about the gameplay, I would like to mention that this game runs like trash on my PC. This is the PC that I use for the record. 8-core 10th gen Intel, RTX 3060, 32 gigs of RAM, and with 6TB NVMe SSDs within it. I tried to run it on Windows 10 and the game doesn't run when I run it for the first time. It turns out I had to install NVIDIA PhysX, which I already had, but it's a much different version, and I had to copy the PhysX DLL into the game folder because apparently the game couldn't find the thing in my C drive or something. But that's just the beginning. While the game runs at a smooth 60 FPS, the issue isn't the FPS, it's the freaking loading times. I know it's an old game and old games don't tend to utilize the SSDs very well, but I'm not talking about the loading times in between levels. I'm talking about loading times in levels. I guess the game is not smart enough to be able to preload the assets in the next part of the levels. The fact that the game has to pause in between sections of the game just to load the available assets while being on an NVMe SSD is a major freaking annoyance to me. Now let's talk about the gameplay, and I want to talk about the gameplay first because wow, this is pretty much the one major component that a lot of people have problems with, and I can totally see why. I decided to play the game on the easier difficulty to make the experience a lot less frustrating, and I also bumped out all the character stats to the maximum levels possible. Again, thank you WeMod. That's because the last time I played this game fairly with full stealth was back in high school. A lot of the game's janky elements really got under my nerves, and I guess my teenager self got frustrated dealing with it, so maybe if I played a game with max stats, I can have at least a little bit of enjoyment on it. And that sort of happens, but even then, there are still many issues that this game has. The biggest elephant in the room is that this game's shooting mechanics are very different to say the least, and not in a good way. How the game's shooting works is that it's similar to Deus Ex in that you have a reticle, but the reticle is inaccurate by default. You have to wait until its maximum accuracy so that it will actually hit the target. But at least in Deus Ex, you know that it will be more and more accurate. In this game, you have to aim at a specific target, and the target has to be within range so that the reticle can go down, or at least for the pistol. With the assault rifle, it works like Deus Ex, but it fires in bursts by default, and you cannot adjust its firing mode. And I get it, you're a new agent and you can't just become an expert on the weapons on day one, but here's the problem. Even when you max out all your shooting stats, you're still gonna shoot inaccurately. That's right, I maxed out all of my weapons proficiency, and my accuracy is pretty much no different to when I'm trying to shoot them for the first time. You'd expect for an RPG game that your character will get progressively better and better with their weapons, but not this game. Oh sure, the aiming time is reduced, but that's not much of an upgrade. In Deus Ex, if you're a master at shooting weapons, you will instantly pinpoint and shoot the target. In this game, I'm a master at everything, and I still have to deal with severe inaccuracy problems. The only time where I'm a sharpshooter is when I use my special abilities. I wouldn't have an issue with this if it weren't for the enemies. Now, I'm playing on easy, which means that the enemies' aiming is so poor that you can literally run on them and just karate chop their asses left and right, and even when they do hit you, they don't do that much damage. I find running around and karate chopping people left and right in this game to be a lot more fun than shooting them. But in the harder difficulties, not only they can deal damage more, they also shoot a lot better than you, so you need a good defense against them, but the shooting is crap even when you max out all the stats. So while it is a challenging experience, it's certainly not a fair experience, and certainly not a balanced one at that. But the issues don't end there, people. Let's talk about the stealth mechanics, because this game's stealth is really freaking janky and awkward. I know this is a 2010 game and loads and loads of games back there have janky stealth as well, but this one is just bleh. This game has a severe identity crisis with the stealth. The game seems to reward stealth and non-lethal takedowns, but it doesn't give the players a lot of opportunities and tools to do stealth and non-lethal takedowns. The first big problem with the stealth is that the levels are very linear, which means that you're not going to have a lot of options in how you can approach a location. No alternative routes, no ventilation, no way of playing full ghost and just sneak past the enemies without hurting them. It's incredibly basic and unrewarding. Splinter Cell levels are linear too, but at least you have loads and loads of options and methods how you can hide yourself away from the enemies. There's a lot more mobility in how you move from one area into the next, all thanks to utilizing the darkness and the sound. Unfortunately, the levels on this game really restricts you. Some sections of the game are impossible to get past through without alerting all the guards in the area, or at least wiping them off one by one. There are some sections that are arbitrarily closed as well. There are invisible walls being blocked by a couple of crates that I can clearly get past, but the game won't let me to do so because the game is being a dick. Also, this is the first game that I played where the save option saves the checkpoints rather than the state. It's really weird why the game would do that. And if you're one of those people who play the game in full non-lethal stealth, you'll be very disappointed because there are many sections of the game that would require you to be prepared in combat. You cannot pass these sections by running away from the enemies. You have to fight them and clear the area. And since the game's combat mechanics are about as janky as the stealth, you're screwed either way. And since the game has boss fights, the only way for you to fight these bosses is if you shoot them a lot or punch them a lot. Deus Ex Human Revolution also had this problem initially, until they patched it with the missing link and the director's cut. So yeah, I guess the best way to describe Alpha Protocol's gameplay is that it's very janky. The combat is janky, the stealth is janky, the movement of the character in general feels very janky, and even if you max out all the character stats, you will still aim like crap and the stealth will still be janky. Personally, I recommend maxing out all the stats, play the game on easy, and run around the area beating the living crap out of people. At that point, I'm basically playing as James Batman. Also, the game is really short. Maybe it's because I'm playing through the easy difficulty and I rush into the game a lot, but I feel like you can beat this game in around 12 to 15 hours at most. I beat this game in around 8 hours, and I too am surprised by this. I guess it's because the developer spent most of the time considering all the possibilities that you can do in the game, but it's still short to my liking. Regardless, while the gameplay of Alpha Protocol is super janky, what really saves it for me is the role-playing elements. I think Alpha Protocol absolutely exceeds in this department, and it's the reason why I think there's a good game within all of its janky gameplay. Alpha Protocol is made by Obsidian, the developers of Fallout New New Vegas, so they really know a thing or two on how to make consequences actually feel like consequences. A lot of the missions in the game have multiple outcomes and objectives and endings depending on a lot of stats and how you deal with the missions. I particularly really love the character relationship mechanics and the dialogue mechanics. Depending on how much a character likes or hates you, they will either do good things or do bad things to you. I opt to make everyone to like me, even the people I suspect to be enemies, because I feel like they're gonna be useful to me in the future, which makes me feel like a master manipulator of some sort, puppeteering all sorts of organizations and factions so that they can work in my favor. And that's what this game really does well in my opinion. The game really does well at making me feel like a super secret agent. While the gameplay makes me feel like a chimp who just recently learned how to shoot people, it's the narrative content and the role-playing content that really accentuate the feeling of being a super secret agent. The choices that I make, the allies and enemies that I choose, all of it feels very important. I went to the game's walkthrough wiki and I'm just genuinely impressed at how every mission's choices and consequences are laid out and how they affect the upcoming missions. I just wish that the dialogue system makes it a little bit more clear on what I'm gonna say. A lot of characters will definitely prefer a certain type of personality out of the three main personalities, but there are times where you can gain reputation points by selecting the opposite of what personality a character likes. So if the game can make it a little bit clearer on what the characters are saying before I say them, that would be really nice. And yes, considering how this game has character relationships, it absolutely does have romance. I opted for the default girl Mina because she's pretty much the only person who will be with you throughout the game, and I feel like her romance is the one that makes more sense. Thanks to the multiple choices and consequences, the replay value of this game is immense. It might be a short game, but it's the one that I can totally see how people would replay the game again and again just to see the many different outcomes and maybe roleplay as a different type of person. I roleplayed as a smooth talker and master manipulator that everybody likes, but it's also possible to roleplay as someone who everybody hates. As for the actual story, the best way to describe its quality is that it's more in line with Pierce Brosnan's post-GoldenEye James Bond films, as in, it's a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. They're okay at best and garbage at worst. It's a shame that with Alpha Protocol's many role-playing opportunities, the actual narrative content that you're involved in is something so cliched and uneventful that I'm just really not that invested in. The world that Alpha Protocol lives in is filled with all sorts of cliches and stereotypes, which I guess is done to make that secret agent role-playing fantasy more authentic to the experience, but it would at least be slightly more tolerable if the story is decent. The writing wasn't stellar in both the dialogues and the narrative. I feel like the game has loads of expositions and explanations on factions and characters that can definitely get overwhelming, as the presentation wasn't the most stellar or interesting. I still really want to keep on playing, but it's not because I want to know how the characters are going to solve their problems. I'm curious with what the consequences of my actions will actually be in the next few missions, and that's what drives me to finish the missions. But my biggest problem with the game's story, in my opinion, is Mike Fortin himself. It's insane how, despite being able to select 3 different personalities, Fortin is still the epitome of bland and generic video game protagonists. It's not because I chose the professional ones most of the time. Even the suave and the aggressive ones opt to make him the most stereotypically bland versions of those types of personalities. Your created character in Fallout has much more personality than Mike Fortin, so while the game does give you the option to roleplay as whatever personality you chose, the actual character himself doesn't feel like someone who is worth roleplaying as. In conclusion, there's an amazing game hidden within Alpha Protocol, but there's so much jank within it that truly hinders its potential. But to some people, it's part of the charm. While the role-playing elements of Alpha Protocol are some of the best in video games in my opinion, the game is really not saved by its janky and awkward combat and stealth gameplay, mixed in with a not so amazing story and characters. It has loads of potentials to being an amazing god-tier level game. There are nuggets of excellence within it that I yearn for game developers to make more of, but what we got instead is rather jank. And despite all of that, I still recommend people to play it. No, really, I do. I think that this is one of those games that you might either love it or you hate it, but regardless of how you feel about it, I think we can all agree that there's definitely a hidden gem inside this game that, in my opinion, is worthy of people to find and explore for themselves. If you can get this game on secondhand stores or somewhere in the Caribbean seas, I think this game is definitely worth playing, or at least worth trying in my opinion. I played the game for about a couple of hours and I had a really fulfilling, enriching, and even an educational experience. A lot more so than if I decide to watch crappy Hollywood remakes number 42619.